Our first scripture this morning is from Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. The disciples came up to Jesus with the question, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus called for a little child to come and stand among them. Then Jesus said, "The truth is, unless you change and become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Those who make themselves as humble as this child are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me." And from Buddhist scripture, the Kalama Sutra. Now, Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought. This contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, these qualities are praised by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and to happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. And finally, from the Zen Roshi Shunryo Suzuki, the goal of Zen practice is always to keep our beginner's mind. Words from many traditions for our contemplation.
Before I start, I forgot to say this in the first service, but if you get an email from me, it's Reverend Rigby Gmail. Don't open it, don't look at it. It's a little sad, but people realized it was a scam because Reverend Rigby sounded too religious. And use the typical flower preacher kind of thing, so they, okay, this is not Jim. So if you get something and it sounds like a Presbyterian minister, don't open it. Well, we're in a series thinking about how Christianity needs to change to really be a gift for the future. And we're going to be kind of going around the mulberry bush and looking at different things. But I think when you look at what has happened to our nation politically, and where particularly white Christians came down, it's humiliating. Fighting science, fighting human rights, making fun of people for being social justice warriors. When did justice become a joke? Attacking people for being woke, as though living, like sleepwalking through life, that's the way you're supposed to be living. But if you wake up to other people's afflictions and needs, that you're somehow comical. I don't think people are bad. I don't think they have the tools. I think that along the way, Christianity kind of derailed. That when people refused to look through Galileo's telescope, see that was leaving the path that Jesus had taught. When people said no to Darwin, when people said no to women's rights, when people said, looked at regressive scriptures and didn't realize we're supposed to outgrow our roots and our beginnings. I was taught that faith means belief. And I don't know if that's what you were taught, but that's the only version of it that I ever heard as a child in Sunday school. And it was used to defend some really crazy things. And as a kid, I could realize this is not good. This is not going to be helpful. When you can't be honest about what's happening, when you have Christians not wanting to learn honest history because it might make them feel bad, that's not healthy. That form of Christianity needs to die. And the truth is, it's already dead. But it's like a chicken with its head cut off. It's scraping everything and pecking on everybody. I guess it can't peck if its head's been cut off, but you get the... You can make my examples consistent. But I was told to believe things because we so desperately want them to be true. And if you think about it, believing that things happened a long time ago and saying that's what's going to save you. Believing that such and such happened. Last week we looked at James laughing at that view of Christianity, believing that hypothetical propositions are going to save you. James said, well, even demons believe that God exists. What they don't believe in is love and justice and those kinds of things. Also, they don't exist, but I realized after I graduated from seminary, and I'd been in this job for a while, that in all the years of Sunday school, and that was a lot, Sunday school, in all my years as a philosophy major at UT, all my years at seminary, that we had never asked the question, who am I? That's kind of jolting if you think about it. I was a philosophy major, and we never asked the question, who am I? Who is a human being in the universe, in the cosmos? I certainly didn't learn that in the Presbyterian church coming up. But in confirmation class, they gave me answers to questions I could have cared less about. See, I wanted to know who I was. I wanted to know what my purpose was. Was there something I was supposed to do with my life? And I think those are the questions we ask as children. And then somebody tricks us out of those questions. Because those are the questions that guide us. Right? Those are the questions that really are like a tracking beam to where we need to go. I have nothing against, well, I do have some things against Apostles' Creed, but I think creeds are fine, but they're not the center, they're not the core, they're not the marrow of Christianity. Jesus didn't teach with answers. Jesus didn't teach with creeds. He taught with parables. Now, why would you do that? Why would you teach with questions? Because you care about the mind of the other person. And you're not trying to brainwash them, you're trying to free them. You're trying to awaken them, to illumine them. I believe that was the way Christianity was at the beginning, for the first couple of 100 years. And unfortunately, when we got to Europe, they had a better idea. Now, I don't think we have to throw away all the creeds that were written in Europe, but I do think those are on the margins. We've got to move the teachings of Jesus back to the center if we're going to call it Christianity. So what we're going to look at today, I mean, we're going to, for several months, we're going to look at different things, but can Christianity outgrow the idea that faith is belief and have a faith of awareness? A faith where you know who you are. A faith where you can think for yourself, and with life changes, when you learn new things about the world, you can go there and you can be honest about it, where you don't have to hide from the truth. We're going to look at a story that's kind of interesting. In the story, the disciples come up to Jesus and say, who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, you know this is a teaching story because nobody would be stupid enough to ask Jesus that question. Right? Nobody hears after church is going to say, Jim, who do you think is going to have the biggest house in heaven? Who's going to be God's favorite? You might think it, but you wouldn't say it, right? I mean, we're all crazy enough to think that kind of stuff, but we know better than to say it out loud. So the teacher is setting up a story to illustrate something. The question is, who's the greatest in this kingdom? And Jesus brings a child. and said, this child is the greatest. If you want to be great, you need to make yourself like this child. Now, part of that is humility, but I think there's a whole lot more to that image than just the fact that some people are small. I think there's a quality of childhood that we lose as adults if we're not careful. There's an honesty, there's a clarity that's there in children. And I think what's being called to is our true humanity. That when you get lost in religion, I think Jesus is saying, go back to your children's heart, your child's heart, your child's curiosity in your mind. And realize that's what God gave you. The church gave you, the Trinity and the virgin birth and all that kind of stuff. And it may be true, it may not be true. Or it may be symbols of something that's true. That's what I believe. It's a very helpful cosmic poetry. But it starts with you opening your own eyes and seeing through your own eyes. It's a crime when we teach children to see through somebody else's eyes. Do you ever realize that sometimes you're out of your own skin? And what you're needing most in life when you feel lost is just to remember your own heart? I mean, that happens to me a lot. I have to kind of wiggle my toes and remember, okay, this is my body, right? I need to live in here. I need to live in this skin. Not to live in the future, not to live in the past. Your data bank is the here and now, I believe. Not the Bible. When you start with the Bible, there's going to be a problem. I think what Jesus is saying is start with what you're really experiencing. Start with what you really know and what you really feel. And then Scripture will be like corrective lenses. But if you're not looking through your own eyes, even corrective lenses aren't going to help you. Remember Jesus talked about people who have eyes who can't see? Religion is deadly when it keeps you from being aware, from feeling your own heart, feeling your own pain. So in the ancient world, when they would initiate people to try to awaken people, and you see this in the story of Socrates going through this initiation, the first lesson was know thyself. And I think that's kind of what Jesus is saying here. Find your children's heart. Find what your true naked humanity is. That doesn't mean you have to forget all of the religious teachings, but that's not the starting place. The starting place is who you are and the unique gift that you bring to the universe. The Zen master that was spelled wrong on our slide. So if you look up the last name and you'll find it. So the secret of Zen is to always be a beginner. The purpose of the practice is to always be a beginner. The idea of going backwards. In Taoism, which is Chinese, it says, in the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the pursuit of wisdom, every day something is removed, is taken out. Because you're not just a computer that's getting ideas. You are a living, breathing being. And if life gets too complicated, it's finding your own simplicity, your own humanity, and not losing that. I love that passage from Buddhism. And before I read Buddhism and Hinduism, I didn't really see this in Jesus, but it's real obvious afterwards. They say, don't follow somebody just because they're a teacher. Jesus lived that out, right? I mean, the biggest problem Jesus had is with religious people, particularly minister types. And I don't think Jesus hated ministers, surely not. But the point is, there's nobody walking the face of the earth that you're supposed to surrender your responsibility to. If somebody tells you what to think, they're not following Jesus. Right? That's not what Jesus did. If somebody says you can love this person but not that person, does that sound like Jesus? So, the first point, I think, is to kind of reboot, find your children's heart. And the second image that I get from children is that we're supposed to grow. Right? After you do that, we're supposed to grow. And it's not growth in random. We are part of one body. That's symbolized by Christ in Christianity. It's symbolized by the Buddha mind. But we are part of one larger interwoven reality. As much as the church was afraid of Darwin, that's where the symbols were calling us to. I saw a quote on Facebook yesterday. I just love it, and I'm trying to find out who said it. But somebody said, Einstein said that everything is relative. Darwin said everyone is a relative. I love that. And if you look back at Genesis, isn't it saying we're all part of the tree of life? It's real clear after you leave Christianity for a while, getting away from the preachers, and then come back again. You say, that's what Jesus was saying. I mean, I love the Apostles' Creed, and I don't love that's too far. But if that was the point of Jesus' teaching, then why did he just give us the Apostles' Creed? He didn't mention that stuff, right? Because that's not your heart, right? Your heart isn't believing in things that you can't even test. It's coming to your own experience profoundly and realizing you're interconnected with other beings. So the first point is to find your kind of native self and then to grow into wholeness with other beings. When we have a mystical experience, and I think everyone does, I think every time you look at the sky and you go, wow, and it blows your mind, that's a mystical experience. I mean, you don't have to call it that if you don't want to. But I think when you look in an animal's eyes and you get this weird connection, or you look into the eyes of an infant and you say, okay, there's something weird happening here. And this looks like a little Buddha. Those weird moments where you sense the depth of your being or the interconnectedness of being. That's, I believe, what mysticism is about. But when you're taught something different, those moments come and go. And it's human nature, when you have an experience, not to grow into a new level. That's the whole point, is to let go of what's dying and go into what's being born when you have an experience. If you try to make sense of it in your old understanding, then that's just where you're going to stop. Right? So it's growing, it's releasing, and realizing that the little self, this little person you see in front of you, may look okay today, but in 50 years, this isn't going to look real great. This is a vessel, right? It's a vessel within which I can grow into the common life. And the more I realize that's who I am, the less my own death terrifies me. Right? Because I realize I'm really that interwovenness. And I'm supposed to change shapes. That's what life does. But what I think Jesus and Buddha were trying to tell us is we're all born on the Titanic. Right? The ego is a non-winnable game. When we think that's who we are, and when religion teaches us that's who we are, that salvation means the ego being lifted up to this great house in the sky, that doesn't help you. What Jesus is saying is you're going to dissolve and it's okay. Because what you're dissolving in is your larger self. What you're dissolving into is your true home. And it goes in stages. Everything is relative in this universe, but everyone is related. So when Jesus says what you do to another person you do unto yourself. That's not saying there's somebody with a scorecard watching your ego and punishing you when you do something wrong and rewarding when you do something right. It's saying we're interconnected. And so what I do to you, what you do to me, we're doing to ourselves, to our larger self. Okay, then the third idea is that it's not like you start off small and you get big. It's a spiral dance. You get on the pony, you fall off the pony. Right? One day, you're Mahatma Gandhi. The next day, think of somebody. I think I'll get in trouble with any example I give. Religion needs to be something that when we've lost our balance, we can hold it in our hand. It needs to be concrete, simple. But it needs to open up to be the whole universe. And we just dissolve into the universe, and the next day we wake up and we're not there anymore. You know, those moments are so brief, that sense of wholeness and things. So there's a spiral dance that I think Jesus was calling being born again. The way the church is taught is you get born again once. It has to be every other minute if it's going to work, right? Because we lose that balance, we lose that wholeness. The word salvation means wholeness. There's no greater heaven than loving and caring about all being. Falling in love with everyone is the true salvation, I think. The word belief, that idea that faith means belief, I think that comes more from the Latin, credo. The Greek, it more means trust. But the Hebrew word for faith, listen to this. I looked this up on a Hebrew website. The Hebrew word for faith is Emunah. We usually think of faith as something which is connected to organized religion and may have many preconceived notions about it. But when we look at the root, it might turn out to be something far more primal to our experience. The word Emunah is based on the word em, which means mother. Like a mother who is feeding, teaching, and loving her child, Emunah is an almost subconscious influence in our life that nurtures us and gently guides us in our journey through this world. When we're taught that God is a boy, this is hard to have this experience. But when we realize we're birthed out of this love, then it's all around us. We don't have to wait for it to manifest. We know we're living in it, we're breathing it. It's nurturing us even if we can't see it. That's what faith is. Not believing what the church tells you, but the faith to let go of those parts of your lives that are dying and seek out those places in your life where something is being born. So some disciples supposedly came to Jesus and said, "Who's greatest in this realm that you're talking about?" Now, you've probably been taught, I've been taught, heaven is someplace else. That's not what Jesus was saying. It's all around you. You're in it, it's in you. You don't have to look for it. In fact, when you stop looking for it, it's right there in front of you. It's always in the here and now. And so he said the first thing is to know thyself, to get in touch with the child within you, and then to let that child grow, to let go of things that are deadening you. That can be scary, but to let go of that and trust that something sacred is being born through you. And then to realize that it's okay when you lose your balance, you lose your path. That's a part of the spiral dance, that you're not born again once, it's continual. But the secret, I think Jesus is saying, is essentially what the Zen master Suzuki was saying. The secret to this salvation, which is not about belief, but about life, the secret to that salvation is to always be a beginner. Well, this is my groping with the passage. We now take a minute for you to maybe do better or think how you would have preached this in a different way.